Well, Delinda Grindle, welcome to the journey. And you've been on here a handful of times. And so I appreciate all the work that you do for the community, as well as the work that you do for KP, and obviously being part of Diane and our family. So I get not only professionally to
Mhm.
work with you, but then also personally. But
Mhm.
just for the listeners that may not know you, you've been with KP, since the very beginning. But maybe if you could just explain a little bit about yourself and about the work that you do.
Sure. Well, approximately probably 23 years ago at Christmas time, my niece on my husband's side, her children died in a farm fire. It was her only two children. And so that was really the first traumatic loss, besides my grandparents, that I had experienced. And from that, just being a part of that family and watching how the family was grieving, I decided that might be an area that I would like to pursue as far as counseling. And so I entered Dr. Wolfeld's program out in Fort Collins, Colorado, at his Center for Loss and Life Transition, and ended up getting certified in grief and death. And so then from there pursued it through the church, later went back to school and got my social work degree. And so that's the population I work with mainly at KP, is grief, not just through loss or death, but, job losses, caregivers, um, and different areas like that. Plus then I run the aftercare program, Soul Prince, at Fitzgerald's Funeral Home. So,
Gotcha. Well, I know you are extremely busy with a handful of different things that you're involved with, and because it's has grown, and maybe it's maybe a combination of uh, you know having you educate me and inform me over the last 20 plus years, um, but it seems like there's a lot more. A lot more awareness about grief counseling and the grieving process, and so I think that's a good thing, in general. Um,
right.
so maybe right now, especially with with COVID happening and the pandemic happening, it seems like there's more death is always around us. It's because it's part of life, but it
Correct.
seems like that has definitely been amplified over the last 6 to 7 months.
Right.
And maybe even if it isn't loss of life, um, there have been people that have been sick. Um,
Mhm.
Being able to spend time with people, if they're in assisted living, or a lot of those things we haven't been able to do like we normally did even a year ago. So um,
Mhm.
maybe you can speak just a little bit about not just loss of life only, but the loss of maybe normalcy.
Right. Well, I think that just since COVID happened in the spring, I've seen more of a complexity to grief, I think. And the reason I say that is because I think there's just really this collective loss of, as you mentioned, normalcy, loss of connection to people because of social distancing, or when we were sheltering in place at the very beginning. We have a loss of our routine, so life as we knew it. And then there's just this whole loss of what does the future hold for us, because we don't know. And because COVID started in the season of spring, we were moving into summer so we could be outside. Now we're going into fall and winter, and winter, has its other set of what would you call dynamics to it, when it comes to grief too. So I would say people grieving has become a little bit more complex. And so, like, things that I see when people are on edge now with COVID are like hypervigilance, where um, we're really hypervigilant to people sneezing or coughing, um, to social distancing. Like if you're in the store and someone's not 6 feet away from you, we might be very sensitive to that. So then I also have seen, which I'm sure you have too, is just the increase in anxiety in people. And even if I'm not an anxious person normally, I may be experiencing even more of that now too. And things like us being more upset. I want to kind of angry because we can't, these are things we can't control. So there might be more anger within us. And so also, as you and I know too, our world's probably not going to ever be the same.
Right.
And people are
Well,
realizing that.
well, and I think, there's an element that because because of it's that anger, I think, and frustration is also coming from a place of who can I trust and what sources, this being a political year and all the political election year for presidents and all the different, aspect of pointing fingers and blaming. And so this happens every 4 years, we know, whenever the election comes up, but even more so now because of feeling like we need to have information about the virus and
Mhm.
how do we stay safe, but not knowing what can we trust, who to trust, and what sources to trust. I think there's just an added element to everything. Um,
Right. Well, don't you think too, we're seeing more, I think sometimes it's just hard to regulate ourselves emotionally. We're getting so much kind of, I call it sensory overload. There's just so much going on. And you bringing up the election is another good, point that we're just, I think it's hard for people to learn how to regulate themselves and their emotions. And so, then we have stress that comes into play, right? And as far as just have your history in bodybuilding and just your self-care physically, when we have chronic stress, of course it's going to affect our immune system. And so I think there's just a lot of different things that people are dealing with, thus making this grieving more complex.
well, and I think this is it's interesting for me. I started lifting weights consistently on a regular basis when I was 11 years old, and so and actually started going to the gym when I was about 13,
Mhm.
and this is the first time that I have not gone to a gym since I was 13 years old. I still haven't returned back to the gym. I've been working out, 4 times a week, 4 to 5 times a week, typically more four, that I do an actual routine. And then I do something every day regarding either stretching or meditating. But I, I know that that is another thing, and I know some gyms are open and I've just made a choice not to go back for a handful of different reasons. But I know that that is another thing that it takes even more energy and effort um, to be self-disciplined because now I don't there's not that reinforcement of the other people around me or people that I may normally see at the gym or whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Plus, I think I'm seeing an increase more in the anticipatory grief that we can experience too. Um, this, mm, I think we kind of feel there's more loss to come. And again, I'm not saying just loss by death, but just, again, if we go back to phase two, or if we go back to whatever phases prior, that's going to be another loss. And so it's almost like we're anticipating that there could be more loss to come, which then I think brings in a feeling of kind of hopelessness with people too.
Right.
And when people have lost their loved ones, when I'm working with them that way too, there's just, I think all the emotions are more heightened because COVID's a part of this now too, because of not being able to have, funerals, visitations, the way that we used to. We're limited now again. That shifted back to 25, I believe, this past weekend. In groups, you could be in 25 social distancing. So we're already seeing changes again.
So speaking of that, and that's something that, unfortunately, in the last, month, I've had individuals that either I went to high school with or that I used to work with that have died during this time period. And
Mm-hmm.
even as something as I hear about it, I heard about it through either through a social media or through somebody, and got the information that way. But there wasn't obituaries. I haven't seen the obituaries. I haven't seen, and then even if I do see the obituary, then the idea of maybe there isn't a funeral at this particular time. It hasn't been scheduled or anything.
Mhm.
Um, so what can some people do? Because there is typically that's part of the grieving process, is that we have these certain ceremonies or certain rituals that allow us to have a place for that energy to go. um,
Mhm.
what do you see with that happening, and what would be something that we could possibly do, um, if we're being limited to being able to have the ceremonies of a funeral? What are some things that we might be able to do to help that healing process?
Mhm. Well, I think that a good thing is we have to validate and affirm our feelings. We have to be able to share what we're experiencing with others, if it's our family, if it's friends, if it's, a counselor or going to see, services. Um, and we can affirm our feelings in different ways, either talking or journaling, through music or art. Um, but the thing because what happens when we're able to have a funeral and a visitation is we're really saying goodbye to the physical body and hello now to the grieving process. And in order for us to do that too, um, that's why people come around and surround us and pay their respects, to the person that passed away. So their grieving process can start too, even as, friends or family. So I always really try to encourage families, if, again, we have rituals and traditions that we can do in our homes too. And this time of season is a good place to do that. So you were asking me, so like at Thanksgiving, maybe I couldn't have, a full funeral, but at Thanksgiving time, we can still honor that person that passed away by lighting a candle or having, something read at that time. Same with Christmas. Um, so there's different things that we can do to still honor that person and continue that grieving process, even though maybe it didn't begin, what we're normally used to, how we're normally used to having that. Does that make sense?
Sure. Oh yeah. And I think those are things that, I mean, I know that we've done in our family, and
Mhm.
things that we can do, even if it is during a time period of those traditional ceremonies that can be done, public or semi-public events where larger gatherings of people can be there. It Because I think it's good, at least I know for me, it has been good for me to not only share stories of
Mhm.
the one that's passed, but also to hear stories of other people's perspective about their relationship or that person, what that meant to them. Um,
Right.
and there's something about that that seems to have some healing components to it, of just being able to hear those stories,
Mhm.
share those stories,
Mhm.
share in those stories. Yeah, there's something about that, and maybe it's um, about that person then coming to the forefront of our consciousness, not just the the lack of them physically being there, but their lives are still living within us because of us sharing those memories.
Right. Which is really kind of nice. Why? Like I know at Fitzgerald, you can go on and do send online condolences.
Mhm.
If you put the person's name in, and you go into, most funeral homes have that, where you can, extend your condolences. So that's another good way to share a memory with the family, or your thoughts on that person. How did that person impact your life, or what did that person add to your life? Same thing when we send out cards and notes. It's I encourage people to share a memory, write a memory in the card, or let the person and family know what this person meant to you. Even like what were their strengths you saw in them. If you were their coworker, or a lifelong friend or something like that. And again, if I write a note to you, let's say you lost someone, and I write a note to you and maybe kind of remember to do that every 3 months or something. Again, I am allowing you to also grieve when you open that. That process is still present because you're reading about what I have to say about your loved one that passed away, or giving you words of encouragement, or, things like that. So that's how we can support one another, outside of physically being in the same vicinity with each other, is text, dropping a text real quick, thinking of you, you know. So I think we have to be more creative now in how we support one another,
Sure.
and the different ways we can do that.
So I know this is not going to be an easy question maybe to answer, and I know it's complex. There's multiple could be multiple answers to this, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes, and maybe it's amplified now. I think this happens all the time, but it may be amplified right now. But how they use the phrase that sometimes a person will get stuck in their grief. Um,
Mhm.
they they seem to get stuck in a certain aspect of feelings about what's going on. What would you, from your observation with some of the clients that you worked with, when someone gets stuck? Now, obviously, the opposite, as they work through that stuckness, right? Then that's part of the healing that we talk about. So, but what are some components that may lead to someone being stuck?
Well, a good example would be, what's really natural for us to do when someone passes away is we kind of place them on a pedestal, and so we don't um, maybe acknowledge struggles that we might have had with the person, or just parts of their personality maybe that uh, we kind of conflicted with. And so what happens is then I can get stuck in this feeling like this person was, way up here and I'm here. And we have to kind of bring that person back to a level with us too, and start working through some of those other feelings that we're having, um, abandonment from them or anger with them. And so that we can continue to move forward. The whole thing I think about being stuck is the fact that we have to acknowledge sometimes we choose to stay stuck out of fear of moving forward. Because
Okay.
if I move forward, then a lot of times we feel like we're leaving that person behind.
Okay. So maybe maybe I will be stuck in my sadness, or stuck in my anger, and hang on to that because it's a way of somehow, what you're saying is that I'm able to keep. If I let go, then I may forget about them, or I may minimize their impact on my life.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, yeah, and because we're afraid that if we engage back in life and engage in activities that we enjoy doing, your mind is thinking, well, I'm leaving them behind. And why should I enjoy life when they can't enjoy life, or they're not here to enjoy life with me?
Mhm.
Really, they're with us all the time. And so, um, if some people will get stuck because of that fear of living this life without this person and not feeling that they're worthy of doing it,
Mhm.
of this life and moving forward, does that?
Sure.
And that's kind of why, sometimes we'll see that pedestal piece with people too.
Well, and I think it's a natural thing, right? When someone dies, we have a tendency to, or there's some loss that happens, we have a tendency to elevate the
Mhm.
the good times, or the things that were good about that situation. It's similar to a breakup in a relationship. If we're broken up with, in the complexity of that ending, and maybe even a sense of rejection, we fixate on the things that weren't going to be or aren't going to be anymore.
Mhm.
Even if we tie into it some magical thinking of that, maybe it was even better than,
Mhm.
than it actually was, right? Because we're
Mhm.
still in that idea of how we want it to be, right? And I think sometimes maybe that's even what's happening, right now, where we may be having a deeper appreciation or longing for how things were maybe a year ago, and the freedom that we had of being able to go to different places and things. But I think it's really about what things can we, during this time of change, what things can we learn about ourselves, if that change happens to be a loss of a person in our life, or if it's a loss of an aspect of our normal socializing. How can we be creative, like you said, to still create those memories, still create opportunities for connection? It just may be, well, it's going to have to be different, right?
Right. Right. And when you were talking about feeling like I'm stuck in my grief, if someone would say that to me directly, I feel stuck in my grief, then I would ask them what does it feel like to be stuck in their grief? What do they mean by being stuck in their grief?
Mhm.
That is different for every person, you know. So I try to have them define what they mean by stuck in their.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because we have to start with where they get that sense or that feeling. And
Mhm.
sometimes as a family member or friend, or some kind of guide in this, we may notice a pattern
Mhm.
of, of someone repeating certain things, or doing certain things over, and it probably doesn't benefit us if we accuse someone of being stuck, but we
Right.
can we can ask them questions about, and because, like you said, we don't know exactly what's going on with them. We only know what they've shared.
Right. So let me go back to the pedestal piece because maybe I need to bring this full circle. So recently I was speaking with someone and they said, I just kind of feel stuck and just feel stuck. And I said, okay, describe what that means. Well, you know, the person that passed away, I've put them up here and like you said, focused on all the good things that we shared, but yet there was a lot of struggle in that relationship too. And so that person felt like they couldn't move forward because all they were looking at was all the good things and kind of putting the struggles, in the back seat. And so finally, when she was sharing more of that, I said, okay, well, let's talk about the struggles. What is it? What were those struggles? And then as um, she started to work on that, then see that person that was on the pedestal comes back down to being just like you and me. And then she was able to process more of those negative feelings that were present so that she could continue to grieve in a healthy way. So that's kind of when I talked about putting someone on a pedestal. And sometimes people feel stuck there because they've got this person really high up here as if they had no faults
Mm-hmm.
or there was no struggles. So
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe that's just good, uh, some good, direction. Anyways, is that if we have a tendency to put someone above or below us, we aren't really seeing the person for who we are or who they are, right?
correct. Yeah.
um and again, I think that there's that tendency that if we villainize someone, make them the bad guy of the story, or make them bigger than life, I think there's probably some level of risk doing that, because where are we in relationship to that?
Correct.
and
Hmm.
and,
Hmm.
and so I think that just to be mindful of that, and maybe even more so right now with all the different things that are happening, and with, like you had mentioned, due to some increase around this area, in other parts of the country, there's been an increase in cases of positive COVID cases. So then there's been more restrictions put on to try to get control of the virus from spreading. So, and we may not fully understand, and we know that there's a ripple effect of that,
Hmm.
and maybe, like you said, maybe even more fear that what else is gonna what else is gonna happen, kind of like what originally happened in March and April. So,
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
Delinda, I know you have to get off to start seeing some clients today
Mhm.
and busy working, but as always, I appreciate you coming on and just sharing a little bit of your experience and your perspective about how we can be aware of how we're handling these changes
Mhm.
and if there is a more specific loss that's happened in our life, meaning a loss of life, what things can we do to be conscious and aware and
Mhm.
being able to share with other people um, our thoughts and feelings.
Mhm.
Any last thoughts for any of the listeners about anything they may be going through, and maybe we can have you on as we get closer to the holidays for some specifically to how to help the healing process during the holidays. But
Right. Well, I think I'd just like to end by really encouraging people to really practice good self-care at this time. If it's through just again validating and affirming your feelings, connecting with others in the ways that are possible for us to do that. Even maybe writing a gratitude journal. What's one thing I'm thankful for this day? Learning to relax and just rest and care for yourself, sleeping and eating nutritionally and getting some form of movement, um, practicing mindfulness. I just really think it's time for all of us to really just practice those good self care and encourage one another to do that and try to really find moments of joy, at this point and allowing ourselves to feel that and share that with others. So I think self-care is really important.
well, and like you said, that idea of self-care is not only physically but mentally and emotionally as well as
Mhm.
spiritually,
Sure.
and just being mindful and just being aware of what is happening with us, regardless if that's being resistant to something or gravitating towards something. So,
Right.
well, Delinda, thank you very much for being with us, and I'll look forward
Thanks,
to having
Kevin.
you on the show again, so you can kind of share with us some of your observations and some things that you've learned along your own journey. So,
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.
thanks.